Dear Wethersfield and Connecticut interstates, Rhode Island, for example, New York, leading up to the World Trade Center attack, and since, people on and off the state of Connecticut judicial branch offices, and on and off the state prison offices, and on and off military locations, DMV locations, department, but even the campuses that train them, there are roles with a method recorded. That is a method /S. For example, where and how. What is slavery about? It was about a method, a breaching method /S that had already been sustained against the names known, and with only the extent of their names known, with the involvement sustained against Native Americans and against colonists, sickly distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously. It is against those names known, like the other countries. Like England was associated with not just with the colonization of the North. They were associated with remote possession of remote uses of the locations and areas and states of England and of America. In other words, they had slavery in the North and South sickly distinctly. Thank God it demonstrates a breaching method. Thank God that we could charge. We could counter together. We could counter with things that are true always, not denying exceptions. In fact, with exceptions in demonstration of the same thing. Because that's how nature works. Nature will demonstrate negative value, nature progressions, acts, and natures when entertained is what forced entertained. Simultaneously self-valued and hating it. Everyone hating it, but everyone ignoring it because it's through things that everyone has no control over. And it's as uses of exception nature, where they're making binary positive and negative treatments that are both in collusion, criminal insidiousness natures that can't defend themselves, defending that as fact treatment nature and us from what exploited and exploits that. So there were people that made a whole bunch of statements and confessions to me. A whole bunch of different people through time. In other words, they time where you're going to be. And then next. Off campuses. As people in collusion from other classrooms that keep each age a fact treatment nature. Now, as victims, but as victim predators. And it is recorded that and how they won't let me discern how they are victims. And they're switching names and forging names consciously through time. This is also FBI, CIA, other agencies and military. And uses of investigations and investigators associated with other things, just simply to use them, those other things, so they would be knaves. Where they're going to justify their fact treatments towards instances parted. Subjects' treatments parted. And they're going to put their faith in superiority, what to do with that. So former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, in his defendant capacities, former standing chairperson on Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Organization Act. No, an act associated with needs to counter the real causes of negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures, but having been doing so through criminal foreign influences, such as and/or in collusion with them, such as witch trials were, /are. When you bring out what that is, even if they made it up, differentially, especially that's what it was, though. One thing it is always, criminally foreign influence and delusions wrought simultaneously, and responses to what caused it. No, leaving out simultaneously how things like slavery were. No, they're replacing this with other than is actually recorded, because our founders left us to use correlation because they didn't have free speech. And because the laws were such where you had to entertain speech and therefore use speech that couldn't entertain itself, if it tried to use other speech, it would be sensed by the breaching method. They had individuals in groups and had everyone in collusion against every individual at all locations, areas, and states. So that wouldn't happen. Way short of being able to make a unity or not in with stability enough to be able to address that which is with the motivations too of everybody. Because now when there are instances good and or bad, they're going to be self-valuing, the good and the bad in treatments in knaves and collusion with that which is leveraged again too against each where and how it is relevant, increasingly relevant, where and how the sciences share an identity. They demonstrate to us a shared hyper-simultaneous nature of value, of increasing value, but it is increasingly being denied free speech. This gives the formal fact treatments give Native Americans rights. They make them hyper-Native American rights. But they're only allowed to speak about Native American rights as hyper-Native American rights. So in other words, they're not allowed to appreciate science that uses correlation nature that, what is true all ways. Not denying exceptions in exception nature, especially because the method of having exceptions that appear to be in demonstration, in other words, of other, but they're really in demonstration of the same thing. For example, and where and how that is relevant to finite treatments of itself and group treatments of that same truth that are manifest differently, and that being where and how English was revealed and languages revealed by the scientists about the invisible but still discernible, and their conjunctions to the hyper discernible. For example, the subject and the predicate, a verb. And then note how a verb, if you put ing on the end of a verb, it becomes a noun, becomes a participle. And or a participle is the same thing. The identity of the verb changes. But the identity of the verb, the word in the verb, it never changes simultaneously too, relative to where and to how. We are this hyper volume that English is revealed to teach, for example. The notes of English grammar. The notes of music. And the narratives about history, about the history of English and about the history of music. They are recorded with opinions and convictions that are recorded self-valued, criminally foreign influence. And through and as identity to the ground, names, locations, and even homes were involved with this. Memories, no. Instances, relationship, no. To other people's names too, simultaneously, individually grouped, and species identity. Know how the species and how individuals are one body. And so, know how groups are increasingly with convictions and opinions that can't defend themselves and afford anyone to have mandated law followed outside of courts and outside of police stations and outside of the interplanet places where it counts. Reception of the law. Reception of perception. So this is a method that is connected it's an identity theft / fraud method, clear as day. It is also evidence where and how people will bring in race of all the arrays. to fight with people if they try to address things that are true always. Not deny exceptions, all exceptions and demonstration of things, same thing. There is an identity theft fraud method. That's one of the things that slavery was. Now, we're going to be like with the ancient gaming system, even before it's up. You know, even here with the acting side. In other words, we're going to counter predicate acts properly. I'm not a lawyer, not a police force, I'm not a criminal, I'm not a doctor. We also have to counter where and how doctors in courts, judges, have been speaking fake things into databases with overt criminal enterprises, plural, and private ones, including the prisons tied to them, with their family members, ages of them, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed how kept needing to hide their roles with predicate acts in cases and at locations on the ground per their roles with identity thefts and frauds that are actually what is recorded. I don't know Subby Bajerio. And they went out of their way with judges that demonstrated through speaking fake things in the database. In other words, they went out of their way to pretend other. All exceptions, exception nature, and demonstration of the same thing. Where they were involved with you know, also like a whole bunch of names like Eric Olson and Matt Olson are recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with judges and prosecutors and doctors involved with drugs and medicine crime, identity thefts and frauds with Mr. Neville. And I wasn't in my class of Mr. Neville, but Mr. Neville and others recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. Mr. Neville was involved with predicate acts when I was in middle school that were brought up by a Dr. Graham. A whole bunch of names were brought up by people also who recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed roles with a Dr. Graham, with a Phil Cullen. And she brought up the middle school being tied to it. And there are judges with names I don't know of. And the whole people with those courts and prisons tied to them that have been involved with adults and children through time with drugs and medicines crimes, also with criminally foreign influence uses of addiction specialists per where and how they've been fabricating audio and video into fake drugs relationships, fake alcohol relationships with the people that have the roles with the drugs and alcohol parties with the kids when they're young, pretending others were there. Because pretending others had relationships, the natures of relationships to their peers that never were, including especially regarding the people with the overt criminal enterprises differentially, because the same ones kept needing to hide the same life progressions with the interbranch and with a whole bunch of other countries shared on and off the campuses. And towards instances where they're leaving out the sequence shifts, that's relevant because they're measuring and maintaining. No one telling on them where and how there are means and needs to demonstrate the people like Newsmax just had a Washington officer who was fired for not taking a vaccine, which they're also using to keep those treatments either A or B. And they're leaving out, for example, the roles of the state police of Connecticut, their training locations. A whole bunch of people with Central Connecticut State University involved with predicate acts leading up to the World Trade Center attack. And then distinctly shortly before the World Trade Center attack with names they brought into it. And then since the World Trade Center attack, as names involved with predicate acts intercities, falsified police reports, roles with methods recorded of them stacking fabricated police reports that are multiple for the same arrest, and then a whole bunch of different times. And they switch the officers' names and even the department. So they put officers that weren't even there. And they were also pretending, those are officers that were also pretending, me and others, to ties to themselves and people and others tied to them that they are involved with sexual and medical abuses of, and uses of their policing and roles with they have the military also involved, and their uses of the databases. So there are black and white themed. Military police switching names, forging names, roles with some untimely deaths, and wire crimes with NBC Connecticut News, with people all along the street near the streets near WFSB. Our people also recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, who were used, like two cooking classes I had. Different people both used for roles in Wethersfield, with that place in Rocky Hill. Elm Street. When I was a kid, that was one of the. In other words, as the people, and then so this Subby Bajerio is one of the people that Jeremy Grohl said was involved with this, and a whole bunch of other people have that. There's a Judge Smith, and a Joe Aiello confirmed that there's a Mayor Gould who was involved with crimes with judges with middle school kids. A Judge Smith is one of them, but and with the Jennifer Smith's house, and houses near the water that are and with people that are involved with also UPS and on and off the state judicial branch offices, on and off cases they had predicate acts roles with, and with people involved with overt criminal enterprises of different ones, associated also with the private ones, kept needing to hide the same sequence as finite active progressive lies, identity thefts, frauds, instances, roles. They pretend people make conspiracy theories. These are the people actively preventing me a response for some rape threats that I didn't even report yet. They pretend that I spoke about them. I spoke about them on Facebook. They're recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed using Facebook for evidences, crimes, and cases where they've been using the courts to hide where they've been used remotely since founding. That's been happening in other countries too. For example, look where they drive around with nuclear weapons, America and the other countries, and look at their resolutions to it. It's one thing to say mutually assured destruction, but where's the rest of it? Where's real integrity? They can't follow mandated law because they have the that's part of it. They have complete possession of the fact they've been involved. They still have trials for people in World War I and II. In other words, with the Nazi trials being reported. I don't know if that's made up or what. Because even if it's not, even when they tell true things, the lies that were already told, in other words, they already used, quote, the right to lie, unquote, and recorded themselves. Congress used remotely, originally and still, and then screening it. Their January 6th treatments are being used to screen, as a breaching screen, how they had and have roles with those wars and with the investigations of them, that are effectively used to maintain uses of identity treatments at each age of fact treatment nature that effectively have been and are being employed against logic, where science, where correlation in nature has means to demonstrate that science has not spoken for the means for our elderly, honestly. And for disability treatments. These are all the FBI has places on Park Street involved with people in Hartford, involved with people on Church Street in Old Wethersfield, involved with drugs and medicines crimes with their families, intercampuses with doctors too, that have been with judges associated with them personally, criminally involved. And so, in other words, and it's not by accident. They need to pretend other as people that, in other words, as they have to value their arrays, where they ignore all the statutes and precedents to be human, because there are still criminally foreign influence, delusions wrought. But if they would follow the mandated law and they would address everything properly, they have federal rules of evidences, racketeering, worse than war crimes. They have the psychology and psychiatry that was involved with justice treatments, and where people have disputes. Oh, you're crazy. we still have the crazy people, as the quote, experts unquote, pretend other people are crazy. They have their family members and they have insights with the people with the Perron family, I don't know, who recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, with passions and emotions, pretended other. And that's with the Department of Motor Vehicles. And now, I don't know the Perron family. I only know that they involve their neighbors with this too. I don't know that, what's his name? Nick Vandekon. I never had a class with him. I never had a problem with him. So they use the sign, even the coaches they involve with illusions they put where they lock people into confessions, and then when it's in where and it's how it gets involved with identity thefts and frauds and furthers it, everyone wants to hide that for other motivations, natures, needs, interests. Everyone speaking through others forced. Since I was a kid, they would not put in writing anything tied to their writing falsified police reports. And they brought a whole bunch of different cases and uses of kids with those crimes in the past as the ones involved now. Where people, we want to counter these crimes with the kids. Those are platforms. They have this across the country. The national/international news would rather have us charge them for their roles, preventing mandated law and attaching me and others interstates to fake words, and about the World Trade Center attack, and with these names I mentioned to you in locations. So there's a Whiting forensics place also involved with the Joshua Julian, with Coast Guard, and with military, with Navy, with Mexico, involved with the Dr. Graham and the judges and people associated with prisons with kids. That when they were kids, they were involved with federal crimes, with evidences, identity thefts and frauds instances, roles, sequence shifts, impositions on others, education, slanders, pretended only just kid stuff, so they could pretend to know someone. They would pretend to know what they knew before they did. They pretend passions and emotions. There's a method by this. And it's where the uses of their kids. There are more kids' pictures associated with a Leahy family that's involved with a principal child abuser then and now, with more roles of wire crimes with NBC, Connecticut News, and with Wethersfield Police and my town's police chief. Now there's also at least one woman with the name O'Neill who's involved on off campuses, intercities. Also with O'Neill with the Wethersfield Police Department and a whole bunch of other police that forged and switched names. A bunch of them were recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed involvements with that, with a number of the falsified police reports that they involved with this. Since I was a kid, the same people in intercities, they recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed that they're federal and so. It all stems back to O'Brien family, who's one of the ones with Asian families, and with the overt criminal enterprises, and with military police, with with people with the buildings next to the state capitol brought into their confessions. As the people I barely know, they made exceptions. And so they could pretend other with. And the people that he also said Joshua Julian is one of the ones involved with them, with this, with federal crimes, with the principal child abusers campus, and with these KKK themed and black themed military police officers and other military families are involved with identity thefts and frauds, also in the form of falsified police reports. And their roles with racketeering with the prisons of kids. I never went to a kid prison, but those kid prison people were already involved with corruption with the kids. That is also vertical and horizontal database illusion stacking, and setting up exceptions and timing. Where and how they have the roles of the title. Oh, this is our job. This is how we teach education at this age. They're also using the sequence shifts where and how they already had the parents and have them entertaining what they can't entertain in themselves at the same time. And they have roles with them. It's not just a clear line, parents, Board of Education. All those fake differences of integrity are relevant where and how there is no integrity science simultaneously. That is evidence per correlation. In other words, when people make opinions about what Jim Crow laws were about, for example, if you leave out how the predicate acts delivery system method, the breaching method, if you will, then you leave out the identity thefts and frauds method against our founding parents or our founders. We'll refer to them that way. Our founders, and against everyone else it hurt. And one commonly as being hyper native, not everyone not being hyper native, in other words, as what is that simultaneous nature that is not just, but in other words, all three individual, grouped, and species body. It is all three at once. It's self one. It can only be other to make more of that one. Making more of that one, which is demonstrated by science. But this requires a quality of fact-checking nature that uses natures of evidence, uses things that we know already, but not per the applications and per the narratives and the opinions and convictions associated with treatments. In other words, black rights or women's rights or child's rights. They make that subject separated, where and how they have their own kids involved with sequence shifts, identity thefts and frauds. So there were a whole bunch of people, intercities, with locations next to campuses that are also recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with this Leahy family, and with this and then there is also a whole bunch of people who recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. There's a Brian Silver with New Britain Superior Court, who's involved with prosecutors, involved with the prime principal child abusers campus and other campuses. They even have the neighbors of someone in the military. There's a name Casio. I don't know them. All I know of them was good things said about them. But I walked by them once, and it made it look like I knew who I was around. And that was involved with sequence shifts too. People from in my grade, from 89 to 93 in Wethersfield, that had hung around together. They had been with judges attached me to fake natures of relationships to the people I don't know at all from my grade, and with the people around me that are involved with the fed up wire crimes and confessions of Wethersfield police over recent months. And about 8 months ago, calling with confessions out of nowhere about more names forging and switching roles they have, with officers introducing more names too. And they use this, for example, interstates. They pretend people say everyone's bad, when they're the ones who brought up all these names. Think about how many names get brought up when they write a falsified police report, and then too put a huge bond and put someone in jail for. And I caught them doing a lot of bad things with the same ties. The O'Brien family's involved with that too, and they involve Saudi Arabia. They attach Saudi Arabia. They attach all these other countries to force roles with them. And those countries force them. Well, it has no. They make treatments. They counter criminal enterprises in other countries where and how they have involvements with bad things going on at locations, areas, and states, and criminal and serious natures of positive treatments in collusion, like with people pretending to be against racism or white supremacy There are teachers teaching that who have physical delusions, and they are in collusion with some of the parents, and with courts and with overt criminal enterprises and private ones that are and are not there. They record, confess, and demonstrate and confirm to grammar school kids where and how differential criminal foreign influences, each age is differentially criminally foreign influence relevant to these questions. What is slavery about? How does someone want to fight with this? No, they want people to fight. That's why they replace the word argument with they replace words like communications with argument. Oh, this is my argument. Our schools are self-defeating. And so we have to address how inter-campuses, the O'Brien family and others from my grammar school, they're also pretending. I'm trying to speak about where I care about everybody. I'm not making an exception where you brought them in from another classroom and off the campuses, and non-verbally too, because they also make nonverbal demonstrations, have a confessions through others, where and how they keep and kept all formal evidence reception and contemplative natures simultaneously, criminally foreign influence, fact treatments, opinion natures, conviction natures, and simultaneously delusions wrought, victim predators. Wanting and needing to be called victims, that's one of the things, all the different natures of industries, criminally foreign influence, overt criminal enterprises, all the knave roles. In other words, it's not who knows the most names and details of things, who can connect where and how those details were being and are being used properly or improperly. One way is by addressing how we are improper. We are with that identity theft / fraud, the value of the earth below the feet of the people of New York City in the people stacking. We're not going to address the color. We're going to address the identity theft, fraud, how it was sickly shit. That's part of the torture. You want to address color treatments, we're going to address torture treatments. And you're not going to leave the torture part out. Otherwise, you're not going to exploit it. But that's what, if you leave it out, that's what you have to do. That's what they do. They made certain types of identity treatments that are victim predators, commonly. Only the ones to speak. I'm not judging you. I would do the same thing. Wear a suit and tie. You're going to get paid. You're going to speak. Do the suit and tie. What I'm judging are your premises treatment, sequence treatment. You guys are preventing mandated law. The FBI and the courts and Facebook are in collusion, differentially criminally preventing people from reporting things, while they're in collusion fabricating things, forcing qualities of fact, cheaping nature, all ulterior from what we need to defend our identities, where and how they have Facebook recorded as a front. For example, also foreign and domestic medical families and judicial families involved with prosecutions, or they already painted themselves worse than overt criminal enterprises and in collusion with them and with the people that, for example, overt criminal enterprises as victim predators that don't know, can't discern, and the courts, they think people get upset and they need to pretend that people got upset, or people get upset because they feel things are disrespectful, and that's why things went down. Oh, it's because these are little identity theft frauds with their doctors and patients forced in prisons. In other words, these are little rat mobs that want to be called rat mobs because then it pretends that it makes it look like they're telling the truth. They are victim predators that don't know how to speak, the people who are speaking for you, in collusion with overt criminal enterprises, private and interbranch. Again, why is that? So we have to study the instances of that. So we have to deal with actually recorded acts. So you have to, in other words, And we have to use recording, in other words. They know we have to say, to be a leader, you have to be able to speak for and care for the souls of the three branches, and of the exception nature, and of the citizens. Because if it's not for the citizens, it's not for that. Because in other words, but the only way you can know if that's true is by going for what's hyper positive. Because there's only hyper positive, or there's only hyper negative. There is the phenomenon we could call hyper positive or hyper negative. Hyper positive, for example, where evolution's fruits and gifts. It means out of nowhere. Fact, should be nature oriented, for example, are hyper oriented positive. And where they're going to cause, where they, that only happens if you have what is finite, true, active, progressive, and two other additional natures of care there for of two additional identities of sequence / simultaneous nature, themselves simultaneously, each one of those 5 volumes, a trinity. Because part of, not only because part of the complete identity of some hyper simultaneous won't fit in 2 ways, 3 ways, but 1 way, which is 3. In other words, we'll examine this on paper. I don't know what happened to ancientgamesystem.com. But the ancient snow people, there are both the timeless snow people. Both the ancient snow people are forever snow people. And both the ancient snow people are ancient people, snow people. There are more than 2 versions to this. So there are needs per science to define and to discern revealing itself hyperalgebra, and the difference between making positive out of negative or revealing positive that is also simultaneously hyperpositive, so as not to be too and to stay. Hyper-negative value forced from here, Leith of Hadith. The only reason that is self-valued, for example, is because of how the industries individually grouped in together were forged to have entertained what can't entertain itself. The defense of the identities of the industries and ourselves at the same time. Sickly distinctly while the individuals couldn't. Stickly distinctly so the groups of each of the locations couldn't defend themselves and us from what really keeps and keeps mandated law from being defended properly at all locations, and what kept and keeps that self-valued. Everyone rolls pretending others, increasingly valuing other having been pretended. They pretend not to be able to discern the difference in needs to be able to say when our countries do good or bad. So they want to attend. So the person's involved covering up sequence shifts, for example. The person with the military involved with the Afghanistan withdrawal treatments. It is where the leader's voice to try to limit deaths, or to counter such with such. That is the complete possession of locations, areas, and states that themselves are the complete possession of a breaching method that itself is also fluent through other countries that are only to the defense of their roles with titles and jobs. Commonly, sickly, distinctly. See suits and ties. See counters to it recorded in collusion where it counts. Overtly through time, they'll steal your identity if you try to address with proper sequence treatments the beginning of the Old Testament. People that pretend passions and emotions against Catholicism or the other forms of the religions associated with the name and or title Jesus Christ. Juxtaposed, energy C, your C. Consciousness is high, rising. Inherent C's, tell. I'll break the spell. Follow mandated law. So they have been using interbranch locations to fabricate audio and video, and they've been using methods where everyone speaks through other and they all play stupid, and that through time builds up. And they also use it for a complete that is their lipograph. They have to pretend they have integrity now, and where and how nature gives people at each age of fact, achieving nature means, needs, obligations to demonstrate they have no integrity into branch, and the overt criminal enterprises, and the private ones, and the people in the religious locations, roles and uses of them, and have it simultaneously, differentially, and not or not. But commonly, they have not had the quality of fact, achieving nature that could defend themselves or afford, and simultaneously afford the quality of fact, achieving nature to explain proper treatments of the natures of criminal insidiousness natures, like wrongdoers, and like act in wrongdoing itself, and they're like acts themselves, like predicate acts. And so they have sequence shifts. So they have women and men distinctly and non-distinctly of the Olympics who are recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, also with the types of theater, including comedians, used offensively to pretend passions and emotions, to keep consolidated groups treatments, to keep consolidated countries treatments, states treatments, overall group treatments, individual leveraged against individual treatments, where and how we are the individual body, finite treatments, grouped and species ourselves. They do this by weaponizing that. Commonly, in other words, they're pretending, now they have to pretend others, so they have prejudice. They have the environment. We're trying to counter racism per environment. We're trying to counter the environment. That's a quality of fact, achieving nature that can't defend itself and afford discernment of where and how. Counters to the breaching method that involves what Jim Crow laws were / are about, which again is identity theft, fraud, it's clear as day. And if someone denies it, which they do, they demonstrate, which they do formally. So we have formally our sciences recorded self-value, criminally foreign influence, and that increasingly, with defenses of itself, needs to increasingly self-value that having been. So there is a Bob Woodward, and there are people with CBS that won't follow mandated law, who are also involved with WFSB, recorded intercities, involved with people from all along Elm Street through time, and increasingly on-off campuses, roles with predicate acts, identity thefts and frauds, and maintenance to treatments of positive or negative, where everyone's just gonna, everyone wants to ignore all that is increasingly demonstrated to them, per where and how the overt criminal enterprises and the private ones confess and demonstrate themselves, roles with our interbranch also, and private, and overt criminal enterprises and people not just associated with body dumping spots and killers, but the spots next to them. And not knowingly, because those are spots where offensive evidence reception racketeering knaves, 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 were manifest by this breaching method originally and still. So when they make treatments of wealth or of not wealth, they're in collusion. No, we're trying to counter wealth without discerning how hundreds of nations wear our share here and there. And how they wear our share here, we're not allowed to tell. Because there's sick fake laws here and there. And that is here and there, those shared kids, they're going to be off campuses together too. Now those off campuses placed at the colleges and universities have been maintained, woven through fact, cheap nature, oriented sequence shifts, illusions, identity thefts, frauds, lies about kids through kids, and then uses of it at corners of streets because people are going to drive by there. That, you know, someone's going to make a confession right there while they're driving, a statement. People are going to get hit by cars on these streets. You know what I'm saying? There's too much order to that having been to the people who are offensively fabricating police reports roles, and as the people in the background with the narratives, and how they were from other classrooms, involved with people lying about the nature of, and you know, I never had one word, I never partook in any of the bullying of a Stephen Stein.